Like usual, for the first 15 minutes of class, we are going to work on MobyMax. So type in the address, and when you get to this page, you'll click Sign In, and you'll check that this says Charles City Middle School. And if it doesn't, then you'll type it in here, just like I am. Click Find, and it should be the first option. Make sure you click the one that says Iowa, and then you'll type in your username and your password. And once you're logged in, you can do the daily challenge and earn some game time. Then you'll click the second tab and make sure you do your language lesson for the day. If you've earned some game time, then you can click the fourth tab and then play some games. After you finish with MobyMax, I want you to log into our Google Classroom. And on Google Classroom, I posted a question and I want you to respond to it. The question asks, what might be scary about sharing or writing or thinking with others? And then my second question is, what can we do to help others feel that we respect and care about their thinking? As we get further into the school year, we are going to be sharing our writing with the class much more often. And because of this, I want us to think about these questions and how we are going to show respect to people when they share. So once you finish your response to my question in Google Classroom, you're ready to listen to the read aloud for today. So we are reading various kinds of text to help get ideas for our own writing. And today we are going to read a very different kind of story, a story that invites you to really stretch your imagination. So the first story by our author is called Mosquito. A mosquito bites my mother. She swells shockingly and then floats upwards and lodges against the ceiling. What's going on? I demand, coming into the living room for a magazine. Some funny little thing bit me, my mother replies, and this followed. I groan in despair. Mom, I protest, why are you always doing these things? Don't be a fool, she says peevishly. I told you what happened. Do you think I want to be up like this? A response immediately sounds in my head, but I don't say it. I grit my teeth and then go out to next door and get the neighbor, who is very kind and has a stepladder and is used to my mother's ways. Then I go to the kitchen phone and call the doctor. He says my mother has a prescription. She knows what to do. I make a sarcastic jibe at his last statement and let out a laugh, trying to get him to join me in it. He doesn't. He says to call him if there's still any swelling in the morning. I go back to the living room. My mother's down, sitting plumply on the sofa with the neighbor beside her. She has apparently just commenced her in-depth narrative of the episode, and I hastily deliver my information and make my exit before I get trapped into the audience for a command performance recital. The neighbor sits beside her, looking rapt. Back in my room, I try to read. After a while, I look out the window and see her slowly walking the neighbor to the front gate. He carries the stepladder. A couple of times she bobs into the air, and she yelps with nervous laughter and flaps her feet, and he gently pulls her back down. So after reading this story, we're going to discuss two questions. I want you to think about what is the story about, and then we would discuss it with your table group. And then I want you to think about what is unusual about this story. So I'm going to read another story by the same author, and as I read, I want you to think about what's unusual about this story and imagine what it would be like to write something like this. So this is called Milk. On a bet, a man climbs inside a cow. Once there, he decides to stay. The cow's interior is warm and soft, although very dark, but the man's eyes get by with the driblets of light that do manage to seep in. Food is no problem. There's milk and more milk, fresher than dairy fresh. The man wisecracks to himself, chuckling as he pulls off his socks. No need for clothes, after all, so why bother keeping them on? He bundles them up and stuffs them down the appropriate cavity, thinking slyly of how they'll end up. Then he lies back and dozes. The movements of the cow, now that she's quieted down, are lulling. The man's friends are still out there, beside themselves. Every once in a while they band their hoarse voices into a collective shriek of protest from the world of sanity and reality. But their cries grow hoarser and feebler, and then disappear altogether into the milky stomach mucus with which the man loads up his ears. Slowly, the contented grace of a baby, he falls into a deep sleep. Outside the sun creeps away, and the moon climbs up over the pasture. The cow wanders slowly, still cautious in her gait, chewing cud. Finally, she sinks with heavy care onto the grass, well away from the rest of the herd. Her large, sensitive eyes brim with concern as she tries to fathom her new fate and responsibility. So, like with our first story, Mosquito, we are going to discuss these two questions together in table groups and then with a class. So, we're going to talk about what is the story about and then what is unusual about this story. So, you might think that it's unusual because a man climbs into a cow and you never find out what happens to him. And another thing that might be unusual is it's really short. I am going to read one last story by our same author called Journey. And as I read, I want you to think about how this story is similar to the first two stories that we read today. A man makes a little proscenium in a living room. A proscenium is like a little theater or stage. He looks around over his shoulder. Then he climbs through. His new surroundings are miniature and picturesque. Snow is falling. He opens up a big, dark, high-domed umbrella. He starts up the cobblestones beside a canal. A green barge toots mournfully as it passes. The snowflakes make a cap on its stern lamp. The man waves after it. He quickens his pace. In the silence he is aware of his breathing, the clouds of his breath, of the sounds of his footfall, the rub of his clothing, the minuscule patter of the falling snow. He hurries along under his umbrella, beside the canal, until he is a small dark point, until he is indistinguishable in the silent scenery. Later, someone comes into the room and, going by the table to get a book, draws shut the toy-sized curtain. So like we did after the first two read-alouds, we'll discuss the first two questions. So I want you to think, what is this story about? And then what is unusual about this story? The third question is, what is similar between the stories? And this is a new one. So I want you to compare and contrast all three read-alouds that we heard today. So something that's similar between all three is that they're all short, they're all imaginary, weird things happen in them, and usually a man is doing something strange. So what I wanted you to get from these three read-alouds today is that writers are free to write about anything they can imagine, no matter how far-fetched or how strange it is. The writer can create completely imaginary worlds and write about them as if they are real. So if you're coming up with ideas, or if you're writing a story and you're just thinking, oh man, this is too weird, or it's too far-fetched, it's too imaginary, nobody's going to like it, just know that there are authors, like we saw today, that create very imaginary worlds where strange things happen. So I added a fourth question that I want you to think about, and it's, what ideas are you having that you might be able to write about? So using the three stories that we just read today as inspiration, what ideas might you be able to come up with on your own that are similar to what we read today? After you add a list of ideas of things that you could write about, I want to do a 5-minute quick write. And remember, a quick write is a technique and an exercise where you can practice skills we just learned and get your creative juices flowing. So you can pick a writing idea that you came up with today and write a short story similar to our read-alouds. You can pick another writing idea that you might have in your notebook and use that as inspiration for your story. Or you can add on to another previous story that you may have been working on.